The job market was already rigged. We've all known that. Now, corporate America looked at that rigged game and said, that's a great start, but can we automate the cheating? That's what the latest Stanford study is showing us on algorithmic hiring. It's showing us that everything is rigged, that it's not just bias, that it's not just bad software, that it's not just some weird HR tech experiment that's gone sideways. What that study is showing us is that this machine and these platforms are rejecting workers at scale, and they're hiding the damage behind fake neutral math. And what's the goal? Well, the goal is to make desperate people apply to job after job after job while never knowing the same invisible hand keeps slamming the door shut on them. If you've ever wondered why right after you apply, seconds later you get a rejection notice, that's what you're seeing right now. That's a design feature. It's not a bug. And it's class warfare in the billionaire and millionaire class doing whatever they can to make people as desperate as possible. Now, you might think that all of this is just some weird Black Mirror episode, but this is actually about corporate America turning hiring infrastructure and optimizing it to make workers as desperate as possible. The billionaire class and the millionaire class are centralizing who gets a shot and who doesn't, and they're all doing it under the guise of efficiency. And the ultimate goal for them is to continue accumulating power and making workers more and more desperate and willing to take lower wages, worse benefits, and everybody in control gets to call that the market. Now, the study that I'm referencing is called Algorithmic Monocultures in Hiring. And what the Stanford study did was that it looked at what happens when employers are using hiring algorithms that are used by a handful of similar vendors. The researchers studied more than 4 million applications from more than 3 million applicants across 156 employers and over 1,700 positions. These weren't tiny companies that were being examined. The employers in the study had combined annual revenue about $225 billion. So this entire study wasn't about the future of hiring. It's looking at what already exists as part of the machinery. And what they looked at was a really simple process. Workers apply, they get sent through a platform, they get to play all sorts of assessment games and psychometrics, the algorithm gives them a score, and then the algorithm spits out recommend or do not recommend. And when you look at this from a high volume hiring perspective, do not recommend usually means a human never looks at your resume. Now, all of us have known that this is part of the game that's being played. We've known that everything that we see, from the instant responses to the weeks and months of ghosting, nobody's really looking at us. And when we apply to these roles, it's clear that the vast majority of these things, when we hit apply, ends up in a giant black hole. But there's something really insidious going on. If you're a job seeker, you're applying to a lot of different companies. You're applying to a lot of different jobs, and you're thinking that you have a lot of different chances at getting hired. But what the study showed was that when it's the same vendor that is sitting behind all of these platforms, workers aren't getting 10 chances. They're getting the same rejection 10 different ways. And that's why this is really ugly. Now, the Stanford paper uses the phrase algorithmic monoculture. What does that actually mean? The TLDR of what that says is that an algorithm behind all of the applicant tracking platform systems is putting the thumb on the scale so that companies end up creating the same sort of profile that gets hired. There's nothing polite about this. This is engineering a workplace where everybody looks the same. A bunch of companies are using the same kind of digital gatekeeper, and that gatekeeper can decide who wins. And more importantly, that gatekeeper also decides who loses. And guess what the shade of the losers looks like? This isn't an equal opportunity. This is a corporate choke point, and that choke point exists by design. And when you put that choke point in front of wages, in front of healthcare, in front of benefits, in front of rent money, childcare, and basic survival, You're not just screening resumes. You're deciding who gets to breathe and who doesn't. Now, what the study found was that over 90% of US employers rely on these algorithms to screen or rank job applicants. And those algorithms shape which workers get interviews. And how often have we seen in our LinkedIn feeds or in our social platforms, people who have been applying to thousands of jobs never to be given an interview? That's because these applications are largely never seen by a human. Now, the authors of the study call those algorithms a bottleneck to opportunity for billions of workers. And I think many of us who are in job search mode have felt that bottleneck. That's the key word, because corporate America loves bottlenecks. The billionaire class and the millionaire class loves bottlenecks because they're the ones that control the bottle. They hate the fact that there's any regulations in place. They hate unions. They hate workers comparing pay. They hate anything that gives regular people leverage. But when you give them a privately owned algorithmic bottleneck that screens workers before they can even speak to a manager, that is how they can continue to maximize shareholder value and make sure that they're getting workers on the cheap. Funny how that works, isn't it? It's all about how much can we extract out of every worker that's out there, and how can we make the job landscape a sea of desperation that we can exploit to the benefits of our C-suite, our shareholders, and our billionaire owners. Now, keep in mind, these are the same people pulling the strings that don't want workers to organize. They call that a threat to the free market. But when the same corporations coordinate with each other and through shared vendors and shared platforms and shared software and shared black box screening tools, they call that innovation and efficiency. They call that the future of work. When reality is that it's the naked exercise of power in an effort to make people and employees as desperate and as scared as possible. Now, that exercise of power is what the game is about. And by exercising power in a very specific way, these organizations and their leadership get to hide what's really going on. Now, would you be surprised to learn that through that exercise of power, the researchers found clear racial disparities once they stopped looking at the numbers the way that the corporations wanted them to look at those numbers? And that's the reality. The company framing is the whole trick. They want you to look at the whole pile of applicants together. And when you do that, everything can look fine. But corporate America hates it when you actually dig into the numbers and move away from the averages, because the averages smooth out everything. And the averages blur what's actually going on. And the averages make the numbers look clean enough so you'd never have to worry about getting audited or sued. So when the researchers looked at the data on a job-by-job basis, the entire picture changed. They found that almost 11% of positions showed adverse impact against Black applicants. And they also found that close to 5.5% of positions showed adverse impact against Asian applicants. Additionally, they found that almost 31% of Black applicants applied to at least one position that adversely impacted all Black applicants. And almost 19% of Asian applicants applied to at least one position that adversely impacted all Asian applicants. And when you think about that, that's corporate America and the tech bro class in a nutshell. It's the same old corporate misinformation game wearing a Patagonia vest. The discrimination in the job search doesn't vanish because somebody put it in software. In fact, the machines often are built with that baked in because the people designing it have programmed it with the same biases and worldviews that they share. The entire system is trained on a warped labor market that's built for employers, paid by employers, deployed to protect employers. And even when all of that is the case, those same employers are telling you a whole song and dance about how their process is objective. That's the whole part about this that is really interesting. They're not using resumes in the old school way. What researchers looked at was how these platforms used game-based assessments And the companies claimed that those assessments proactively helped to debias the models. And yet, when the researchers looked into it, they still found adverse impact against Black and Asian applicants. So when someone says the algorithm doesn't see race, the answer is the people who programmed it definitely saw race. And America in general has always seen race. The labor market has seen race. Schools see race. And everything across society is built on racial separation. And the algorithm is trained on all of it, while the vendors that sell you the algorithm tell you this story about how everything is neutral and you get the best candidates rising to the top. That's the message that they tell you so that you don't have to deal with the uncomfortable reality of what's really going on. What you're really looking at is discrimination wrapped in a black box and called neutral. Now, if that wasn't bad enough, the study's not just saying that some groups get hurt. It's saying that the same workers can get rejected over and over again because the hiring market is becoming less independent. Historically, if one employer rejected you, another employer might see something different. And here is where it gets really creepy. Before algorithms took everything over, one manager might have cared about a whole different set of criteria than another. One might index experience while another might index potential. None of that is necessarily fair, but at least there were cracks in the wall where you could actually wriggle through. What the algorithms do is seal all of those cracks. And what the paper found was that applicants who applied to 10 positions, 4% of those applicants were rejected from all of those 10 roles. And that rate was higher than what you'd expect if each employer were making truly independent decisions. And that carries over the entire job search experience. And this is where it ties into how job seekers are feeling increasingly frustrated and helpless about what's going on in the system. You apply over and over again, and you're rejected over and over again. You rewrite the resume, that's rejected. You take an assessment, that's rejected. You lower your expectations and take different jobs. You don't get anywhere in those jobs. You apply for worse jobs with worse pay, with worse hours and fewer benefits, and you're still getting bounced before you even talk to anybody. And what nobody tells you is that the same underlying logic of these algorithms is following you around like a corporate ankle monitor. And that's a purposely designed maze of frustration designed to wear you down and make you quit and make you as desperate as possible. And then corporate America has the nerve to tell everybody that you're not trying hard enough. They tell people, network more, upskill, be resilient, customize every application, treat your job search like a full-time job. Raise your hand if you've heard all of those things before. Meanwhile, every person in a job search is feeding hours, hope, personal data, and unpaid labor into a machine that's already decided that you're not the type of person that the market wants. That's a gap that no one can close. That's a power gap that every job seeker is helpless against. And let's be real, everything about this zeroes in on class. Why are corporations doing this? Why are executives loving a world where applying for work takes more time, more energy, more applications, and more humiliation? The reason's simple. Desperation's profitable. And they want desperate workers to take the lowest possible offer that they can think of, because when you're in survival mode, you'll accept a terrible schedule. You'll stay quiet about unsafe conditions. You won't ask about additional benefits or healthcare or HSA accounts or a 401k or a pension, because all you care about is keeping a roof over your head and food on your table, and the rent's due Friday. And when you are operating in survival mode, you're willing to swallow the whole we're like family BS that they feed you, because the alternative is to be out on the street. And all of that is the economy that the billionaire class wants. They don't want a free labor market. They want a terrified labor market, a market where workers are isolated, confused, ranked, scored, filtered, and exhausted. Because when you're in that state, if you ever get an opportunity that's put in front of you, you take it. You don't negotiate. Because the less the average worker has, the less leverage the average worker has, the more leverage that the billionaire class, the executive class, and the millionaire class has. That's what all of this is about. Now, the researchers of the Stanford study actually ran simulations to see what would happen if applicants applied more broadly. And what they found was that no applicant was rejected by every model, and every applicant was recommended somewhere. So the problem wasn't that these workers were universally unemployable. The problem was that real people don't apply to every single thing. They have limited time, money, energy, resources, and things that need to get taken care of. Now, what's interesting about this is that when researchers looked into it, they found that workers needed to submit about 25 applications to get their rejection chances below 0.1%. Under normal circumstances, without an algorithm being present and playing gatekeeper, you would have needed about 10. So what that's telling you is that the algorithms behind these platforms that are curating resumes that get to the hiring manager are forcing workers to do 2.5 times more work to get the same basic shot at a conversation. And all of that work that employees or candidates are doing is all unpaid. Nobody's paying you to fill out 25 applications. Nobody's paying you to make a new account on the 19th broken hiring portal that you're working on. Nobody's paying you to upload your resume and then manually type in the same stuff into 47 little boxes. That's how the entire process is designed. Some HR tech goblin built a system that hates both humans and PDFs and forces you to spend all of your time and all of your life applying over and over again into a black hole. And the only people that benefit from this is the employer. Because when every worker is forced to overapply, the company gets a bigger pile of desperate people. They can say, look at all these applicants. Clearly, our compensation structure is fine. So let's see who we can get to take the cheapest possible offer we can find. And meanwhile, on the hiring side, everybody's thinking everything's fine because they have a pile of applicants to go through. So they don't have to examine anything about their process, anything about their culture, anything about their company. They can have the pick of the litter of all of these applicants because the systems in place are forcing 2.5 times more candidates to apply in order to get a shot at a conversation. What you're looking at is manufactured desperation. And every single company is banking on that to make their balance sheets look great, because the more workers you can hire on the cheap, the more you can give out in bonuses to the C-suite. And the funny thing about all of this is that these people will tell you that this entire process that they've set up is about finding the best talent. And yet they ignore the fact that these systems that they've put into place consistently ignore and block black and brown faces from getting in front of hiring managers. If it were about talent, they would make the hiring process more human, more transparent, more accountable, and less punishing. They would tell applicants what happened. They would audit every role. They would disclose when the same model is being used across multiple employers. They'd give workers a chance to appeal a rejection. They would let independent researchers inspect the system. They would stop pretending that their algorithmically designed do not recommend stamp is the same thing as a hiring manager looking over your resume. But they don't do that because they want their systems to appear as complex as possible, because it allows them to hide behind the bias that's baked into their systems. Their systems and their algorithms is a shield that's designed to hide the fact that their entire operation has been built and designed by people that don't want people that look like me, that don't want people that are in the global majority in their workplaces. It's a design feature, not a bug. And they don't want anybody looking into it, because if you look hard enough and if you look at things the right way, the entire shell game falls apart. And that would force companies to be responsible for their vendor decisions. It would force vendors to justify how their algorithms are designed. And it would force executives to step up to the front and have to explain how their efficient processes are doing such a great job at keeping brown and black faces out of workplaces. All this is technological Jim Crow. And what it's doing, it's protecting the owner class from the one thing that they fear the most, which is workers knowing exactly how the game is rigged. So what does that mean for regular people? So what this means is that the hiring process is becoming another site where democracy gets hollowed out and it's replaced by a private owner. Because work isn't just work. It's rent, it's medicine, it's food, it's the ability to leave a bad relationship. It's the ability to raise kids. It's the ability to say no to a boss who thinks your life belongs to the company and wants you to demonstrate what it means to be a good team player. And when corporations control access to work through shared systems, they control more than hiring. They control the bargaining power. And when the bargaining power of employees collapses, wages get suppressed, benefits get trimmed, schedules get worse, unions get harder to build. And everything falls over to a system that's closer to what we saw in 1789 or the Gilded Age, where a small handful of people benefit and everybody else is living out of the gutter. What they've done is built a machine to make workers desperate. That's not what the paper is claiming, but that's the implication. What the Stanford study does show is that it's creating a structure that creates repeated rejection, racial disparities, and market-wide risk. And while it shows that, what you also see is that the people in power keep adopting these structures to weaken workers year after year, industry after industry, and they expect none of us to notice the pattern. There's so many people who are currently looking for work, believing that the reason why they're not getting hired is because of something that they personally have done wrong, when the reality is that the entire game has been rigged. The entire system is set up to make you desperate and demoralized so that you will take whatever you can take in order to survive. And at this point, corporate America has built an international job casino, and you are sitting there pulling the lever over and over again, feeding the machine and letting it get trained on how to do a better job of excluding you from the marketplace. The house rules are the algorithm, and there's a reason why the house keeps winning, because they've rigged the entire thing against you. And the only thing that keeps happening is that corporate America continues to win while workers continue to get screwed. And when you throw the algorithm in it and feed it more data, all it does is that it teaches itself how to rig the game even faster against you. When we take all of this into account, it becomes clear that we are way overdue for hitting stop on the machine and organizing one of the world's biggest class action suits against all of the corporate entities that have knowingly or unknowingly deployed these systems designed to make us desperate in an effort to steal everything that they can possibly steal away from us. Thanks for checking out this episode of Left in Exile. Hope you liked it. Drop me a subscribe and drop me a comment on what stood out most for you. And until then, see you next time.